I thought a night shift at a quiet convenience store in Virginia would be the easiest job I ever had. But the moment I stepped inside, I found a list of strange rules taped to the counter. At first, I laughed until the phone started ringing at 1 a.m., until the faces pressed against the glass at 3:33, and until I heard my own voice calling me from the aisles. The rules said the store would try to keep me. Now the sun has risen, but I'm not sure if I ever really left or if I'm still trapped inside with something that looks just like me waiting behind the counter. Would you survive the night shift? Welcome back to Dr. Snooze, where every night brings a new tale that keeps you on the edge of your seat. If you enjoy these spine-chilling stories, don't forget to hit the like button, share with your friends, and subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. Your comments mean the world to me. They keep this channel alive and growing, and I love reading your thoughts after every story. So let's dive in together, if you're brave enough. I never thought taking a night shift job at a small convenience store in rural Virginia would change my life in ways I could never imagine. When I first applied, it seemed simple enough. Sit behind the counter, maybe mop the floors, ring up a few customers, and watch the hours crawl by until dawn. I needed the money, and the location was close enough to my apartment that I could walk there if my old car finally gave out. The store sat on the outskirts of town, off a stretch of two-lane road surrounded by endless woods. It wasn't exactly inviting, with its faded sign that simply read "Corner Stop" and a flickering neon light that hummed louder than it glowed. I was told it had been around for decades, long before the highways cut through the area, and locals still used it as a quick stop for gas, snacks, or cigarettes. When I went in for the interview, the manager, Mr. Dalton, seemed relieved that I had applied. He was a short, stout man in his late 50s with deep bags under his eyes, as though sleep hadn't visited him in years. He barely asked me questions, just looked me over and said, "You'll do fine." Then he slid a folded piece of paper across the counter toward me. "These are the rules," he said. "Read them carefully. Don't take them lightly." I thought it was odd, but I didn't question it. I figured it was the usual corporate stuff, how to treat customers, how to clock in, things like that. I didn't open the paper until later that night, and when I did, I almost laughed. The list was short, handwritten in messy ink, and unlike anything I'd ever seen. 1. Lock the doors at 12:01 a.m. sharp. Don't open them for anyone until 6 a.m., no matter what. 2. If someone knocks, don't respond. Don't look at them. 3. Between 1 and 2 a.m., the payphone outside will ring. Don't answer it. 4. If you hear footsteps in the stockroom after 3 a.m., ignore them. Never check. 5. Do not look at the security monitor between 3:33 and 3:45 a.m. 6. If a customer is still inside after 12:01 a.m., you must get them out immediately. 7. Keep the lights on. If the power goes out, use the lantern under the counter. Don't stay in the dark. 8. At dawn, when the sun rises, everything will be fine. I thought it was some sort of hazing ritual, maybe a joke they played on all the new hires. But when I asked Mr. Dalton about it, his face turned serious. "You follow the rules," he said, "or you won't last, trust me." That was the end of the conversation. On my first night, I walked into the store just before midnight. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting the aisles in that pale, lifeless glow only convenience stores seem to have. The smell was a mix of burnt coffee and stale chips, and the hum of the refrigerators filled the silence. Mr. Dalton was already there, waiting for me behind the counter. His hands trembled slightly as he handed me the keys and told me where to find the cleaning supplies. "You'll be alone tonight," he said. "Remember the rules. Don't try to be brave. Don't try to be clever. Just do what's written." I tried to make a joke about it, but he just stared at me with those tired eyes. Then he left, and the moment the door shut behind him, I felt something shift in the air. At 12:01 a.m., I turned the lock on the front door. There was no one else inside, and for a moment I felt silly, like I was taking part in some play acting. I sat behind the counter, pulled out my phone, and tried to kill time scrolling through social media. The store was silent, except for the buzz of the lights and the hum of the refrigerators. But then, a little after 12:30, there came a knock at the door. It wasn't a polite knock either. It was sharp, urgent, like someone was desperate to be let in. I froze, remembering the first rule: don't open the doors, don't respond. I glanced up. Through the glass, I could make out the figure of a man standing there. His clothes looked old, outdated, like something from decades ago. His face was pale in the dim glow of the parking lot light, and though he was only a few feet away, his features seemed blurred, like I couldn't quite focus on them. He knocked again, louder this time. My chest tightened. Instinct told me to get up, to at least tell him the store was closed, but the rules echoed in my head. Don't respond. Don't look at them. So I stared down at the counter, pretending not to notice. My hands shook and my throat was dry. The knocking went on for another minute and then stopped. When I finally gathered the courage to glance back at the door, the man was gone. I let out a shaky breath and tried to laugh it off, but my nerves were on edge. The store felt too quiet, as though it was holding its breath along with me. Then, at exactly 1 a.m., the payphone outside began to ring. I didn't even know it worked. Nobody had used it in years, and the receiver was cracked, hanging slightly off the hook. Yet there it was, ringing shrill and loud, echoing across the empty parking lot. I gripped the counter tightly, fighting the urge to pick it up. It rang and rang, each chime slicing through the silence of the store. After what felt like forever, it stopped. I thought I was in the clear, but then came the voice. "Please," it whispered. I don't know how, but I heard it as though someone was standing right next to me. "Please, just answer. I need help." I jumped from my seat, heart pounding, looking around the empty store. Nobody was there. The phone hadn't rung again, yet the voice had been so close, almost in my ear. I clenched my teeth and repeated to myself, "Don't answer it. Don't answer it." The clock ticked past 2 a.m. The phone stayed silent, but my unease didn't fade. If anything, it deepened, crawling under my skin like static. Around 3:10, I was in the middle of wiping down the counter when I heard it. Footsteps. They came from the stockroom in the back. Slow, deliberate, one after another. My stomach dropped. I knew I was the only one there. I had locked the doors. There was no way anyone else could be inside. And yet, the sound of those heavy steps echoed against the tile, moving just beyond the thin door separating me from the stockroom. I gripped the rag in my hands, frozen, listening. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. Silence. I wanted so badly to open the stockroom door, to convince myself it was just the building settling, or maybe a raccoon that had somehow gotten in. But the rules screamed in my head. Never check. So I stayed put, staring at the counter, forcing myself not to move. At 3:33, I felt something shift again. The lights flickered, the hum of the refrigerators faltered, and my stomach knotted. The security monitor on the counter buzzed faintly, the screen flickering with static. The fifth rule: don't look at the monitor between 3:33 and 3:45. I sat back in my chair, trying to keep my eyes anywhere but the glowing screen in front of me. It flickered in my peripheral vision, shapes shifting in the static, as though something or someone was moving through the aisles. The temptation was unbearable. I wanted to look to see what was happening inside the store, but I didn't. I kept my eyes on the clock, watching the seconds drag like hours until finally the screen went black again at 3:45. I don't think I breathed during that entire 12 minutes. By the time the sun began to rise, my nerves were shot. The first rays of light trickled through the glass doors, and the store seemed to exhale, the heaviness lifting all at once. Mr. Dalton arrived just after 6 a.m. I must have looked pale and shaken, because he didn't even ask how it went. He just nodded knowingly, like he had expected this. "You made it," he said. "That's good. Not everyone does." I wanted to ask him what the hell that was supposed to mean, but the words caught in my throat. All I knew was that the rules weren't some joke, and whatever haunted that store after midnight was very real, and I had 5 more nights ahead of me. I spent most of the day after my first shift lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the ringing of the payphone, or the knock at the glass door, or those slow, heavy footsteps echoing from the stockroom. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind wouldn't let me drift off. I told myself I'd quit, that no amount of money was worth sitting in that cursed place again. But as the day wore on, reality began to creep in. My rent was due in 2 weeks, my bills were piling up, and there weren't many jobs in town for someone like me. Dalton had promised decent pay, and night shifts meant fewer hours with people, which I usually preferred. Besides, I told myself, maybe I had imagined half of it. Lack of sleep, a nervous mind, a dark old store. It could play tricks on anyone. By the time evening rolled around, I had almost convinced myself it wasn't as bad as I remembered. But when I pulled into the gravel lot just before midnight, all that false confidence drained away. The store stood there in the pale wash of the parking lot lights, windows reflecting nothing but blackness from the woods beyond. It looked small and frail, like a dying animal waiting to be put out of its misery. Dalton was there again, standing behind the counter as if he hadn't moved since the night before. His face was pale, his shirt wrinkled, and when he handed me the keys, his hand trembled more than yesterday. "You know the rules now," he said. "Stick to them, no matter what." He didn't linger. He walked out without another word, and as the door closed behind him, I felt that familiar weight settle over the store, like an invisible curtain had dropped. At 12:01, I locked the door. This time, I sat back and braced myself, waiting for the knock. It came, right on schedule, but it wasn't the same man. This time it was a woman. She pressed her face close to the glass, her eyes wide and frantic, her mouth moving rapidly, though I couldn't hear her words. She wore a thin nightgown that looked damp, clinging to her skin as if she had just stepped out of a lake. Her hair hung in wet strands, and water pooled at her bare feet, though the ground outside was dry. She knocked again, her fists pounding harder and harder against the glass until I thought it might shatter. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself not to look, not to acknowledge her. The rules were clear, but even with my eyes closed, I could hear her voice. "Please," she cried, "let me in. It's so cold. Please, just for a minute." Her desperation cut into me. It didn't sound fake. It sounded like a woman truly begging for her life. Every instinct told me to get up and unlock the door, but fear anchored me to the chair. When I opened my eyes again, she was gone. No wet footprints, no water on the glass, just emptiness. I barely had a chance to catch my breath before one rolled around, and once again, the payphone outside began to ring. The sound grated against my nerves, louder this time. Like each shrill chime was being driven straight into my skull. I stared at the phone through the glass doors, watching it vibrate against the pole it was mounted on. Then came the voice again. This time it was different. Not a whisper, but a man's voice, deep and commanding. "Answer the phone." It wasn't asking, it was ordering. I clenched my fists, shaking my head, repeating to myself that I couldn't, that I wouldn't. The voice grew angrier, louder, as though it were inside the store with me. "Answer it, now." I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The voice wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was in my head. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The phone went silent, the store returning to that awful, heavy stillness. I sat there shaking, drenched in sweat, staring at the payphone until the clock read 2 a.m. That was when the footsteps began again. This time, they didn't stay in the stockroom. They moved closer. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the back, dragging slightly against the tile, getting nearer with each step. My blood ran cold as the stockroom door creaked, opening just a fraction before shutting again. I wanted to run. Every muscle screamed at me to get up and bolt out the front door, rules be damned. But I stayed rooted to the chair, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles ached. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then I heard breathing. Slow, heavy breathing just beyond the thin wall that separated the counter from the back room. I didn't dare turn around. I didn't dare move. The breathing continued for what felt like hours, until finally at 3:33, the security monitor flickered on. I shut my eyes instantly, refusing to look. But I could feel the glow of the screen against my face, and I swear I could hear faint scratching noises coming from it, like nails dragging across the glass. The minutes crawled by, every second an eternity. My whole body shook with the effort of keeping my eyes closed. At 3:45, the monitor clicked off, and the room went dark except for the overhead lights. When I opened my eyes, the breathing was gone and the footsteps had stopped. But I wasn't alone. Somewhere in the store, I heard a faint humming. A tune, soft and low, like someone idly humming to themselves as they browsed the aisles. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. The sound drifted between the shelves, moving slowly up and down, the voice belonging to no one I could see. I forced myself not to get up, not to check. I knew better now. I sat perfectly still, every muscle tense, listening as the humming circled the store, passing closer to the counter before fading back into the aisles. The minutes dragged on, the sound weaving through the silence until finally, at 5:55, it stopped. The first rays of sunlight broke over the trees outside, and with them came that strange, almost instant relief. The humming vanished, the heaviness lifted, and the store was just a store again. Dalton arrived a few minutes later. He looked at me and shook his head slowly. "You made it through another one," he said quietly. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to ask what the hell was happening in this place. But the words stuck in my throat, because deep down, I already knew the truth. Something lived in that store, something that didn't belong to this world, and it wanted me to break the rules. The second night was over, but I knew the worst was still ahead. By the third night, I had stopped pretending that this was just a job. It wasn't about paychecks anymore. It was about survival. All day, I wrestled with the thought of not showing up. My hands shook as I made coffee, as if I already knew what awaited me in that store. I told myself I could quit, that nobody could force me to keep going. But something gnawed at me, something stronger than fear. Curiosity. What was this place? Why the rules? And why had Dalton chosen me? When I pulled up to the store that night, I noticed something new. The payphone outside, the same one that rang each night, had its receiver resting perfectly in place, but I knew for certain it had been cracked and dangling when I first saw it. It was fixed. I couldn't explain why that chilled me more than anything else. Inside, Dalton was waiting as always. He looked worse than ever, eyes red, skin pale, lips trembling as if he'd been biting them raw. "You've made it farther than most," he muttered. "Most?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just handed me the keys, brushed past me, and left. At 12:01, I locked the doors. This time, I prayed no one would knock, but they did. The sound came sharp and sudden, rattling through the glass. I forced myself to keep my eyes down, but in the corner of my vision, I saw the figure. It wasn't a man, it wasn't a woman, it was a child. Small, no older than 8 or 9, with short hair and a blank expression. They stood perfectly still, except for their hand, which tapped rhythmically against the glass, not knocking, tapping. 3 times, then a pause. 3 times again. I gritted my teeth and kept my eyes on the counter. The tapping grew faster, louder, until it became a pounding, as though the child's tiny fist had the strength of a grown man. Then it stopped, just as suddenly as it had started. When I finally glanced up, the child was gone. At 1, the payphone rang again. This time, I didn't just hear the sound. I saw something. Through the glass doors, the phone shook violently on its hook, the cord twisting and tightening as though invisible hands were yanking it. The ringing grew so loud I thought the windows would shatter. "Answer it," the voice boomed inside my head again, deep and guttural. "Answer it, or she dies." The words hit me like a hammer. My chest tightened, my breath caught. Who was she? I nearly got up. My hand gripped the counter, my legs twitching to move. But at the last second, I forced myself back down. The ringing stopped, and then came the sound of crying, soft, muffled sobs like a woman weeping just outside the glass doors. I couldn't see anyone, but the sound was there, raw and broken, filling the empty lot. I pressed my hands over my ears, rocking in the chair until the clock struck 2 and the crying faded away. I thought the worst was over, but I was wrong. At 2:15, the footsteps started again. Slow, heavy, dragging footsteps moving through the stockroom into the aisles. This time, they didn't stop at the back. They entered the store. The sound of boots against tile grew louder, closer, until I could feel the vibrations in the floor beneath my chair. My throat went dry, and I fought the urge to look. But I couldn't help it. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. A man, tall and broad, standing halfway down aisle 3. His clothes were ragged, filthy, his skin gray and sagging like wet paper. His eyes, empty sockets, stared straight at me, though his face never moved. I froze. The rules hadn't said anything about this. They had only warned me about the stockroom, about the monitor, about the phone. But what about when the thing came out? The man took a step forward, then another. I squeezed my eyes shut, my body trembling, gripping the counter as though it were the only thing tethering me to reality. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but sit there, but I couldn't move. The footsteps stopped. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't want to see how close he was. Minutes passed. My body burned with the effort of staying still. Then at 3:33, the monitor flickered on. The screen buzzed loudly, static swirling across it. I dared not look, but I could feel it pulling at me, like a magnet. My curiosity screamed louder than my fear. Just a glance, I thought. Just one. Slowly, I opened one eye and peeked at the monitor. I wish I hadn't. On the screen, I saw the store. Every aisle, every shelf, perfectly still. But in each corner of the screen, there was a face. Dozens of faces. They were pressed against the edges of the camera, distorted and stretched, eyes wide and mouths gaping in silent screams. Their skin looked pale and rotted, their features blurred as though underwater. And then they moved. The faces turned toward me in perfect unison and smiled. I tore my eyes away, heart pounding, clamping them shut until tears stung. I sat like that until 3:45 when the monitor clicked off again. When I opened my eyes, the man was gone. The aisles were empty. But I could still feel him, still smell him, the stench of damp earth and rot clinging to the air. At 4, the humming began again. But this time, it wasn't soft. It was loud, harsh, echoing through the aisles like 100 voices humming the same tune. The sound reverberated through my chest, rattling my bones, until I thought I would go mad. I pressed my forehead against the counter, whispering to myself over and over, "It's almost dawn. It's almost dawn." When the clock finally struck 6 and the first light seeped in, the humming cut off mid-note, leaving the store in sudden silence. Dalton entered moments later. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me with hollow eyes. "You saw him, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I swallowed hard. "The man in the aisle." Dalton nodded, his lips tightening. "You're not supposed to look," he said. "That's how he notices you." The words hit me like ice. "He notices me?" I whispered. Dalton didn't answer. He just turned away, leaving me with a truth I could no longer deny. I wasn't surviving the nights. The nights were noticing me. By the time the 4th night came, I wasn't even pretending to sleep during the day anymore. What was the point? Sleep didn't come, not with the constant ringing in my head, not with the sound of that humming following me even outside the store. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man in the aisle, those hollow sockets locked onto me, waiting. I told myself I wouldn't look at him again if he showed up. I told myself I'd follow the rules perfectly, that I wouldn't slip even once. But I already knew something had changed. The rules weren't protecting me anymore. They were just delaying the inevitable. That evening, I drove to the store with my chest tight and my hands trembling on the wheel. The woods on either side of the road seemed darker than usual, their branches clawing at the air like twisted fingers. Dalton wasn't at the counter when I arrived. For the first time, the store was empty. The keys sat waiting for me on the register, along with the folded list of rules. But the list wasn't the same. I picked it up and scanned the paper. The handwriting was different, sharper, slanted, and there was a new rule written at the bottom. 9. Do not trust your reflection after 4 a.m. My stomach dropped. I didn't know if Dalton had written it or if something else had, but I knew better than to ignore it. At 12:01, I locked the doors. This time I stood with my back to the glass, refusing to even glance at whoever or whatever was knocking. The sound came, soft at first, then harder, shaking the frame. I gritted my teeth and stared at the clock until it stopped. At 1, the payphone rang. I didn't look. I didn't listen. Even when the voice screamed my name, I sat there with my hands over my ears, whispering to myself until silence returned. At 2, the footsteps came. They entered the store again, slow and deliberate. I felt them moving behind me, circling the aisles, always just out of sight. I clenched my fists and refused to turn my head. At 3:33, the monitor flickered. I shut my eyes tight, not even daring to peek this time. But when the clock struck 4, I made my mistake. I had gone to refill the coffee pot, pouring the burnt sludge into a fresh filter, when I caught sight of myself in the stainless steel panel above the machine. Only, it wasn't me. My reflection didn't move the way I did. Its head tilted slowly to the side, eyes widening, mouth stretching into a grin I wasn't making. I stumbled back, heart pounding, knocking over the coffee pot as liquid spilled across the counter. The reflection leaned closer, pressing its face against the warped steel, its lips moving soundlessly. Then, in a voice that wasn't mine, it whispered, "You can't hide forever." I staggered back, covering the panel with a rag, refusing to look again. My whole body shook, sweat dripping down my spine. The rest of the night blurred into fragments. The humming grew louder, surrounding me from every aisle. Shadows moved across the floor where nothing stood, and every reflective surface, every cooler door, every glossy window, seemed to pulse with something alive, waiting for me to look. When dawn finally came, I collapsed into the chair, exhausted beyond words. Dalton walked in a few minutes later, his face grim. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked. "The reflection," I whispered. He nodded slowly. "That's how it begins. Once it knows you, it doesn't stop." "What doesn't stop?" I asked, my voice cracking. Dalton's eyes darkened, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in him. "The thing that lives here," he said, "the thing the rules were written for. It doesn't just want you to break them. It wants you to look, to see it, and once you do, it follows you." I stared at him, my chest heavy with dread. "Follow me?" I asked. "You mean outside the store?" Dalton didn't answer. He just walked away, leaving me with the truth I had been too afraid to admit. This wasn't confined to the store anymore. Whatever haunted that place was coming with me. By the fifth night, my body was nothing but nerves and exhaustion stitched together. I hadn't eaten properly in 2 days, and every shadow, every reflection, every sound outside my apartment made me flinch. I thought about quitting, about driving far away and never looking back. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. Dalton's words haunted me. Once you see it, it follows you. Leaving the job wouldn't save me. The thing was already attached to me, wrapping its claws deeper into my mind each night. When I pulled into the gravel lot, I saw Dalton sitting in his old pickup truck, staring straight ahead. He didn't even glance at me when I walked past. His face looked gray, almost corpse-like, and for the first time, I wondered if he'd been through the same torment years ago. The keys weren't on the counter this time. Instead, a lantern sat there, lit, its faint orange glow flickering against the walls. Next to it lay the rules. Another addition had been made. 10. If you hear your own voice calling after 5 a.m., do not respond. I shoved the paper into my pocket, trying not to think about what that meant. At 12:01, I locked the door. The knock came, as it always did, but tonight it was softer, almost gentle. Like fingertips brushing the glass instead of fists pounding it. I refused to look. At 1, the payphone rang, and this time, I didn't even flinch. I'd grown used to ignoring it. But when the ringing stopped, I heard something worse, a voice inside the store. "Hello?" it called. "Is someone here?" I froze. It was the voice of a little girl, high and trembling, echoing from aisle 4. My breath caught in my throat. There was no way anyone had gotten in. I had locked the doors and checked the aisles. But the sound was real, drifting closer with each word. "Please," the girl said. "I'm lost. Can you help me?" Her footsteps padded against the tile. I gripped the counter so hard my nails dug into the wood, refusing to move. The rules didn't mention this, but I knew what it meant. A trick. A trap. Still, every instinct screamed at me to run to her, to help. I bit down so hard on my tongue that I tasted blood, forcing myself to stay put. The footsteps stopped just behind the counter. I couldn't breathe. Then, in a voice no child could ever make, deep and guttural, it whispered, "I know you can hear me." My whole body went cold. I squeezed my eyes shut and whispered over and over, "It isn't real. It isn't real." The presence lingered behind me for what felt like hours before fading away. At 2, the footsteps returned in the stockroom. But they weren't heavy this time. They were frantic, running back and forth, slamming into the walls, rattling the shelves. I sat frozen, heart pounding, as the chaos built until the whole store seemed to shake. Then, silence. At 3:33, the monitor flickered on. I turned my head away instantly, staring at the floor. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw flashes of movement. Faces pressed against the glass again, grinning, screaming silently. My reflection in the screen twisted, stretching into something inhuman. When the monitor finally clicked off at 3:45, I felt something brush against my arm. I jerked back, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the faint smell of rot clinging to the air. At 4, I avoided every reflective surface. I covered the cooler doors with rags, kept my head down, but still I felt eyes on me. When I risked a glance at the window, I saw my reflection staring back, not mimicking me, but grinning, mouthing words I couldn't hear. The lantern flickered, its flame struggling. I clutched it like my life depended on it, whispering for it not to go out. At 5, the humming began again, louder than ever, vibrating through the aisles, rattling the shelves. I covered my ears, rocking in the chair. Then I heard it, my own voice. "Hey," it called softly from the end of the aisle. "Come here, please." My heart stopped. It wasn't possible. It wasn't me. But it sounded exactly like me. Tone, pitch, everything. "Please." The voice begged. "I need you." I clamped my hands tighter over my ears, muttering the rule over and over. "Do not respond. Do not respond." The voice grew angrier, louder. "Answer me," it roared, echoing through the store. The lantern nearly went out, its flame shrinking to a tiny spark. I hunched over it, shielding it with my hands, whispering for it to hold on. When the clock finally struck 6, the voice cut off. The humming stopped, and the lantern steadied. Sunlight spilled through the windows, chasing the shadows back into whatever dark place they came from. Dalton came in, slower than usual, his shoulders hunched. He looked at me with pity in his eyes. "You're at the end now," he said. "One more night." His words should have been reassuring, but they weren't, because as he turned to leave, I caught sight of something in the window behind him. His reflection. And it wasn't moving the same way he was. By the time the 6th night came, I felt hollowed out. Every nerve in my body buzzed like a live wire, and the thought of stepping back into that store made my stomach churn. But Dalton was right. There was no escape. "One more night," he said. "Just one more." The drive there felt different. The road was darker, quieter, like the world itself was holding its breath. The store's flickering neon sign glowed faintly in the distance, drawing me in like a moth to flame. Dalton's truck was parked in its usual place. He was already inside this time, leaning on the counter, a cigarette burning between his fingers. His eyes looked worse than ever, sunken, bloodshot, like a man who hadn't slept in years. "You ready?" he asked. His voice carried no emotion, just a dead weight. I didn't answer. My throat was dry. He handed me the lantern, already lit, its glow dimmer than before. Then he slid the rules across the counter. Another edition had been scrawled in that same rough handwriting. 11. On the final night, the store will try to keep you. Do not let it. I stared at the words until they blurred. My hands shook as I folded the paper and stuffed it into my pocket. Dalton walked to the door, pausing before stepping out. "No matter what you see," he said, "keep the lantern lit, and when the sun rises, walk out. Don't look back." With that, he was gone. Midnight struck, and the knock came. Louder this time, furious, rattling the glass. I sat at the counter, clutching the lantern, refusing to move. The pounding grew until it felt like the whole building would shatter, but still I didn't look. At 12:30, the door handle turned. I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. It rattled, twisted, jerked violently, but the door held. Then the voice came. "Let me in." It was Dalton's voice, calm, familiar. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering to myself, "The rules, always the rules." But when I opened them, I saw him standing outside, peering in through the glass. He looked exactly like himself, same clothes, same tired face. He raised a hand in a slow wave. "It's over," he mouthed. "You don't have to do this anymore." My heart twisted. What if it was him? What if this was some kind of test? The lantern flickered, dimming dangerously. I clutched it tighter, forcing myself to turn away. When I looked back again, the figure was gone. At 1, the payphone rang, shrill and constant. But this time, something was different. The ringing didn't stop. Minutes dragged on, the sound burrowing into my skull. I covered my ears, but it felt like the noise was coming from inside my head. Then a voice broke through the static. "You're already dead." I dropped the phone, stumbling back. The lantern flickered again, its flame nearly sputtering out. At 2, the footsteps came. Not from the stockroom this time, but from everywhere. Dozens of them. Heavy, shuffling, dragging. I held the lantern high, but its glow barely reached beyond the counter. Shapes moved in the aisles. Not shadows, figures. Pale, eyeless faces turning toward me. Mouths gaping open, wider and wider until they split their heads in half. They shuffled closer, filling every aisle, every corner of the store. I backed against the counter, raising the lantern. "Stay back," I whispered, though I knew it meant nothing. One of them lunged, face twisting into a grotesque grin. The lantern flared, blasting light through the store, and the figure shrieked before dissolving into smoke. The others recoiled, hissing, but they didn't leave. They circled, waiting. At 3:33, the monitor flickered on by itself. I tried to look away, but my eyes betrayed me. The screen didn't show the parking lot. It showed me, sitting at the counter, lantern in hand. But the version of me on the screen wasn't afraid. It was smiling. Its eyes were black voids, its mouth stretched impossibly wide. The reflection on the monitor raised a finger and pointed directly at me. Then every screen in the store lit up at once, rows of static, flickering images of me screaming, me bleeding, me hanging from the ceiling. My knees buckled. I dropped to the floor, clutching the lantern to my chest, begging for it not to go out. At 4, the reflections returned. Every surface in the store, windows, cooler doors, even the shine of the tile, showed not me, but them. Pale, twisted versions of myself. Some grinning, some crying, some with mouths full of jagged teeth. They all mouthed the same word over and over, "Stay." The lantern sputtered again, its flame tiny, barely alive. I whispered to it, pleaded with it, shielded it with my hands. At 5, the humming began. Not soft this time, but thunderous, shaking the walls, rattling the shelves. The figures in the aisles screamed, their voices blending into the hum. And then I heard it, my own voice again. But this time it wasn't calling from the aisles, it was inside my head. "Don't leave," it whispered. "This is where you belong. This is who you are." The lantern nearly went out, the flame shrinking to a pinprick. I fell to my knees, rocking back and forth, refusing to listen. "No," I whispered. "Just one more night. One more." The figures closed in, circling tighter. Their mouths opened wider, jaws snapping, arms reaching. The humming grew unbearable, the whole store trembling as if it would collapse. I thought I was done. I thought the lantern would die, and I'd be swallowed by them forever. But then, through the chaos, I saw it. The first faint glow of dawn creeping through the cracks in the boarded windows. The lantern flared, brighter than it had ever been, blasting the figures back in a wave of burning light. They shrieked, dissolving into smoke, retreating into the shadows. The humming stopped. The reflections vanished. The clock struck 6. I stood on shaking legs, clutching the lantern, and walked to the door. My whole body screamed at me to run, but Dalton's words echoed in my head. "When the sun rises, walk out. Don't look back." So I did. Step by step, I walked into the dawn. The air felt cleaner, lighter, though my lungs still burned. Behind me, I heard the faintest sound, my own voice calling softly from inside the store. "Wait, don't leave me." I didn't turn, I didn't answer. I just kept walking until the store was gone, until the sun was high in the sky, until I no longer felt its pull. When I finally looked back, the gravel lot was empty. No store, no sign, nothing but a stretch of barren road. Dalton's truck was gone too. I never saw him again. Sometimes, though, when I'm driving late at night, I swear I see a faint neon glow in the distance. And when I pass by mirrors or windows or the shine of a dark puddle, I catch glimpses of a face that isn't quite mine. Smiling, waiting. Thank you for spending your time with Dr. Snooze. If this story sent chills down your spine, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. I truly value your comments. They help me connect with you and make this channel a family of horror lovers. Stay brave, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.